There are some voices that belong to a generation, and then there are voices that seem to belong to everyone. For more than 6 decades, Dolly Parton gave the world songs about heartbreak, hope, love, poverty, ambition, faith, and dreams. Her voice could sound playful one moment and devastating the next. She could make millions of people laugh with a joke about herself, then turn around and sing a song that left an entire room silent. Today, that voice has gone quiet. Dolly Parton has died at the age of 80. Her family announced her death on August 25th, 2026, bringing an end to the life of one of the most recognizable and influential figures in American music. Reuters reports that she died peacefully in Nashville. Her publicist said no cause of death had been disclosed, but behind the rhinestones, behind the enormous hair, behind the laughter, and behind the superstar was a woman whose story began with very little. A little girl from rural Tennessee, a child raised in a large family, a young songwriter who arrived in Nashville carrying dreams that were far bigger than her circumstances, and eventually, she became Dolly Parton. Tonight, we look back at the extraordinary life of Dolly Parton, the songs that made her immortal, the people who shaped her journey, the causes she devoted herself to, and the legacy she leaves behind. The news the world didn't expect. The announcement came Tuesday. Dolly Parton's family confirmed that the country music legend had died at 80. Her nephew, Brian Seaver, delivered the family's message in a video statement, and almost immediately, the news began spreading around the world. For millions of people, Dolly was more than a country singer. She was a songwriter, an actress, a businesswoman, a philanthropist, a cultural icon, and for many people, she was something even more personal. A familiar voice, a familiar face, someone whose music had been playing in their homes for decades. Dolly Parton sold more than 100 million records worldwide and earned 11 Grammy Awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award. But numbers alone cannot explain Dolly Parton's impact, because her greatest achievement wasn't simply selling records. It was creating songs that people carried with them, songs that became memories, songs that became family traditions, songs that became part of people's lives. Jolene 9 to 5, Code of Many Colors, I Will Always Love You. These were not simply hits, they became cultural landmarks, and now, for the first time, the world has to hear them differently. Because the woman who created them is no longer here. The final chapter. Dolly's final years were already marked by profound change. In March 2025, she lost her husband, Carl Dean, after almost 6 decades of marriage. Their relationship was unlike many celebrity marriages. Dolly was constantly surrounded by cameras. Carl wasn't. He preferred privacy. For years, Dolly would occasionally talk about their relationship, their differences, and the strange balance between her enormous public life and their private world. Then he was gone, and Dolly had to continue without the man who had been beside her for most of her adult life. She continued working. She continued creating. She continued talking about music. She continued thinking about the future, and that was Dolly's nature. She was always looking ahead. In 2026, she canceled a planned Las Vegas residency because of health problems. Yet, even while dealing with those challenges, she continued to think about her work. The latest reporting tells us that only days before her death, she had spoken publicly about health issues while still indicating that she intended to keep working. That determination says something about the woman she was. Dolly Parton spent her life moving forward from poverty to Nashville, from Nashville to the world, and even at 80, she wasn't simply looking backward. She was still creating, still imagining, still planning, until suddenly the story ended. The little girl from long before the wigs, before the rhinestones, before the sold-out concerts, Dolly Parton was simply a little girl in Tennessee. She was born January 19th, 1946. She grew up in a large family in the Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee. Her family had very little money, but they had something else: music, stories, faith, and family. Those things became the foundation of Dolly's identity. She began writing songs when she was still very young. According to Reuters, she wrote her first song, Little Tiny Tasseltop, when she was around 6 years old, about a corncob doll with corn silk hair. Think about that for a moment. Before she was famous, before anyone knew her name, Dolly was already turning her feelings into songs. That instinct never left her, As she grew older, her ambition grew with her. She performed wherever she could. She appeared on radio and television, and after graduating high school, she made one of the most important decisions of her life. She went to Nashville. She didn't arrive as a superstar. She arrived as a young woman with talent, determination, and a notebook full of songs. And Nashville would change everything. The beginning, one of the most important chapters of Dolly's early career, came when she began working with Porter Wagoner. Wagoner was already an established country star and television personality. He gave Dolly an opportunity that would help introduce her to a national audience. Their professional partnership became enormously successful, but Dolly wanted something more. She wanted to prove that she could stand on her own, and eventually, she did. Leaving a successful partnership was a risk. But Dolly Parton understood something that would define her entire career. She needed to own her story, and one of the songs she wrote during this period would become one of the most famous songs in music history, I Will Always Love You. The song was written as Dolly's farewell to Porter Wagoner as she prepared to leave their professional partnership. It wasn't originally written as a massive pop ballad. It was a goodbye. A deeply personal goodbye, and that may be what makes the song so powerful. It wasn't written to impress the world. It was written to express something real. Dolly recorded It. It became successful, and decades later, something extraordinary happened. Whitney Houston recorded it for the soundtrack of The Bodyguard. The song exploded. Suddenly, a song written decades earlier by a country songwriter from Tennessee was being heard by millions of people around the world, and Dolly's songwriting had crossed another boundary. Country became pop. Nashville became Hollywood, and Dolly Parton became an international musical force. The songwriter who could turn life into music. Dolly Parton's greatest weapon was never spectacle. It was storytelling. She could take jealousy and turn it into Jolene. She could take childhood poverty and turn it into coat of many colors. She could take working class life and turn it into 9 to 5. She could take loneliness, heartbreak, faith, family, and turn them into songs. That ability made her different. She didn't need complicated stories. She understood that ordinary life could contain extraordinary emotion. A coat made from scraps of fabric could become a story about love. A beautiful woman could become the source of terrifying jealousy. A working woman's frustration could become a worldwide anthem. And a goodbye between two musicians could become one of the most famous love songs ever recorded. AP reports that Parton songs have generated more than 100 million worldwide sales and more than 1 billion online streams. But even those numbers don't fully explain her influence, because Dolly didn't simply write songs. She wrote stories people could recognize themselves inside. The woman who refused to fit the box. Then there was Dolly herself. The hair, the clothes, the makeup, the sparkling costumes, the laugh, the humor, the unmistakable voice. Everything about her was recognizable, but Dolly understood her image better than almost anyone. She knew people might look at her appearance and underestimate her. She made the appearance part of the performance. She turned the jokes into armor, and behind the glamour was a remarkably disciplined businesswoman. She expanded beyond music. She entered television. She entered film. She built businesses, and she became one of America's most recognizable entertainers. Her movie career gave audiences another side of her. 9 to 5. She became part of one of the most memorable workplace comedies of its era. Steel Magnolias. Audiences saw a more dramatic side of her acting, and then there was Dollywood. What began as a business venture became something much bigger. It became a celebration of the culture, music, and heritage of the Smoky Mountain region. Dolly didn't simply leave Tennessee. She took Tennessee with her. And then she brought the world back to it. The businesswoman behind the SM of this is where the Dolly Parton story becomes even more interesting, because fame didn't make her stop working. It made her work harder. She understood intellectual property. She understood publishing. She understood entertainment. She understood branding before the modern celebrity economy had even been invented, and she understood the value of owning your work. Her songwriting catalog became one of the foundations of her financial independence. Her business ventures expanded. Dollywood became a major attraction. And Dolly Parton became something rare, a creative artist who also understood business, but perhaps her greatest business achievement was building an identity that could survive across generations. A child could recognize Dolly, a parent could recognize Dolly, a grandparent could recognize Dolly. Country music fans knew her, pop music fans knew her, movie audiences knew her, and people who had never purchased a country record still knew her name. That is cultural longevity. And very few entertainers ever achieve it, the legacy beyond MUSF. But perhaps the most important part of Dolly Parton's legacy isn't sitting on a record shelf. It's in the lives she helped. In 1995, Dolly launched the Imagination Library. The idea was simple: give children books, encourage them to read, give them a better beginning. The program was inspired in part by Dolly's father, who could not read or write, and what started as a charitable idea grew into a massive literacy initiative. Children in participating communities received books at no cost, and the program became one of the most recognizable parts of Dolly's philanthropic legacy. But literacy was not the only cause she supported. She donated to medical research, she supported education, she helped communities affected by disasters, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, she donated $1 million toward vaccine research. That donation became particularly memorable because it helped support research connected with the Moderna vaccine. Dolly's philanthropy revealed another side of her character. She didn't simply talk about helping people, she put resources behind it. Instead of simply singing about hope, she tried to create it. Instead of talking about children needing opportunities, she helped provide them. And that may ultimately be one of the most powerful parts of her legacy. The private double in Dolly Parton was also a study in contrasts. She was one of the most recognizable women on earth, yet she fiercely protected parts of her private life. She could perform in front of thousands of people, then return home and live a much quieter life. She could joke about herself. While taking her songwriting extremely seriously, she could become one of the biggest stars in the world, without pretending she had forgotten where she came from. And perhaps that is why so many people felt connected to her. Dolly never tried to present herself as flawless. She presented herself as human. She talked about poverty. She talked about family. She talked about faith. She talked about hard work. She talked about love. And she talked about failure. She knew what it meant to start with almost nothing. And perhaps because of that, she never seemed embarrassed by her beginnings. Instead, she made them part of her story. Carl Dean and a life outside the spotlight. For all the attention Dolly received, there was one part of her life that remained remarkably private: her marriage. Dolly and Carl Dean were married for nearly 60 years. They were opposites in many ways. Dolly was constantly visible. Carl preferred privacy. She loved performing. He stayed away from the spotlight. Yet somehow, their relationship lasted. When Carl died in 2025, Dolly lost not only her husband, but one of the few people who had known her before. The world knew Dolly Parton before the fame, before the money, before the massive concerts, before the endless interviews. Carl knew the young woman who had arrived in Nashville with dreams, and that made the loss deeply personal. Dolly continued to honor their relationship while moving forward with her work. It was another reminder that behind the public figure was a private human being experiencing the same things everyone eventually experiences: love, loss, grief, and memory. What Dolly Parton left. So, what happens now? What happens when someone whose career has lasted almost 6 decades is suddenly gone? The songs remain. The recordings remain. The movies remain. The photographs remain. The businesses remain. The books remain. The stories remain. There will be children who discover Dolly Parton decades from now. They will hear Jolene. They will discover I Will Always Love You. They will watch 9 to 5. They will hear Coat of Many Colors. And they may ask the same question generations before them asked: how did one woman write so many songs that felt like they belonged to everybody? Maybe that is the greatest evidence of her legacy. Dolly didn't simply make music for her generation. She made music that could be inherited. Why Dolly Parton mattered? Because she crossed boundaries. She crossed the boundary between country and pop, between music and film, between entertainment and business, between celebrity and philanthropy, between generations, and even between people who might otherwise disagree about almost everything. She could walk into a room filled with different kinds of people and somehow make everyone feel welcome. That was part of her gift. She understood that music could bring people together. She understood that humor could lower defenses, and she understood that kindness could sometimes accomplish what arguments could not. That may be why the reaction to her death feels so enormous. People aren't simply mourning a singer, they're mourning a feeling, the feeling of seeing someone who could walk into a room and make it brighter, someone who could sing about pain without losing hope, someone who could become enormously successful without forgetting where she came from, someone who could make millions laugh and still make them cry with a single line. The final Dolly Parton's life began with very little. It passed through Nashville. It traveled across America. And eventually, it reached the entire world. She became a country music legend. But that title almost feels too small, because Dolly Parton became something bigger than a genre. She became a symbol of perseverance, of creativity, of reinvention, of generosity, and of the possibility that where you begin does not have to determine where you end. She entered the world with very little, but she leaves behind an extraordinary amount: songs, stories, businesses, books, memories, and millions of people who can say that, in some small way, Dolly Parton made their world better. Goodbye. Now, the tributes are beginning. Artists, actors, fans, people who worked with her, people who grew up listening to her, and people who may have discovered her only recently, all are confronting the same reality. Dolly Parton is gone, but her voice isn't. Her recordings are still here. Her songs are still here. Her stories are still here. The children receiving books through her literacy program are still here. The businesses she created are still here. The people she inspired are still here. And the next generation of songwriters will still learn from her. That is the strange thing about artists who become truly great. Their bodies eventually leave, but their work continues speaking. A song can outlive its writer. A story can outlive its storyteller. A kindness can continue long after the person who gave it is gone. And Dolly Parton left all three behind. Final farewell. Dolly Parton once wrote a song called "I Will Always Love You." Tonight, those words carry a different weight, because generations of listeners will now say them to her. Thank you for the songs. Thank you for the laughter. Thank you for the stories. Thank you for the courage. Thank you for remembering where you came from. Thank you for giving children books. Thank you for giving families music. And thank you for giving the world a voice it will never forget. Dolly Parton was 80 years old. She came from a small Tennessee community. She dreamed bigger than anyone around her could have imagined. And she became a woman known around the world. The woman is gone, but the songs remain, the stories remain, the memories remain, and somewhere, someone will press play on a Dolly Parton song tomorrow, perhaps for the first time, and when that unmistakable voice comes through the speakers, Dolly Parton will be there again, not as a headline, not as a photograph, but as a voice, a story, a memory, and a legacy. Point one that will always be here.